She built empires out of thread and grit. He built his out of blood and fear. Now Kang Min-jae, the man's soul's underworld once crossed streets to avoid, sat in a wheelchair he couldn't yet forgive, terrified the only person who wasn't afraid of him would finally have a reason to leave. If you believe loyalty should mean something, that no man deserves to be left behind the moment he stops being useful, hit like and subscribe right now. Stay for every twist as the traitors circle. Only the cowards plotting behind Min-jae's back would scroll past this without subscribing. Don't be one of them. The rain over Gangnam didn't fall so much as it judged, streaking down the tinted windows of the mansion like it had opinions about everything happening inside. And it should have, because inside, on the third floor, in a room that used to house a man who needed no help standing up to anyone, Kang Min-jae was learning, badly, how to transfer himself from bed to wheelchair without his wife's help. He failed. Again. "You know," Nia Okafor said from the doorway, arms crossed, voice carrying the particular warmth of a woman who has decided not to laugh at her husband's expense, this time. For a man who once broke another man's kneecap for showing up late to a meeting, you have remarkably poor negotiation skills with your own legs. Min-jae, sprawled half on the bed and half off it like a discarded marionette, glared up at her. "The legs," he said, with the dignity of a man clinging to the last scrap of it, "are not currently taking meetings." "Clearly. Should I schedule one?" "Naya." "Min-jae." They stared at each other, and for one absurd second, something like the old rhythm returned, the banter that had once made grown gangsters uncomfortable at dinner parties, wondering how the most dangerous man in the city had been so thoroughly, hopelessly domesticated by a woman half his size and twice his patience. She crossed the room, hooked her arm under his, and hauled him up like she'd done it 10,000 times because she had. He didn't thank her. He never did anymore. Gratitude, he'd decided somewhere in the last 6 months, had started tasting like defeat. That was the surface. Underneath it, something colder was moving. 3 floors down, in the security office that used to be Min-jae's war room, 2 of his most trusted lieutenants were having a conversation they would have denied under torture. The kind of conversation that starts with just business and ends with a man's empire quietly changing hands. Names were mentioned. Numbers, too. And one phrase spoken low that would have made Min-jae's blood run cold if the walls had ears instead of just cameras he no longer bothered to check. The boss can't even stand. How is he supposed to run anything? Upstairs, unaware, Min-jae stared at his own reflection in the dark window, rain smearing Seoul's skyline into something unrecognizable, and thought the same thing they did, just with more shame and less ambition. He'd built 3 ports. He'd made men who'd survived wars flinch at the sound of his voice. And now he needed his wife to help him into a shower chair, needed her strength for a task strength used to be his whole identity. The man who once needed, no one had become a man who needed everything from one person every single day. And he watched that one person get tired. Not of him, he told himself that lie every morning, but tired all the same. Her smile in the mornings had started arriving a half-second late, like it needed a run-up now. She'd stopped humming while she made his tea. Small things, terrible things if you were paying attention. He was. That night, after the house went quiet and the rain finally exhausted its complaints, Min-jae lay awake beside her, listening to her breathe, and made the kind of decision men make at 3 a.m. that they can't unmake by morning. "Nia." His voice cracked the dark open like a door left ajar. She stirred. "Hmm?" He almost didn't say it. 6 months of pride, sitting right there in his throat, telling him to swallow it back down, to be the kingpin, not the burden. But something in him, the same something that had once made him walk into a room of armed men and dare them to try, pushed the words out anyway, quieter than he meant them, cracking on the last syllable like they cost him something no bullet ever had. "I'm still a man." Silence. The kind that has weight. Then Nia turned to face him in the dark, and he heard it before he saw it. The small, broken intake of breath that meant her composure, the same composure that had once stared down loan sharks twice her size without blinking, had finally, quietly given out. She didn't say, "I know." She didn't say, "Of course you are." She said nothing at all, just pulled him into her arms like she was the one drowning, not him, and held on. Neither of them noticed the black car idling outside the gate, engine off, headlights dark. a man inside it watching the house with the patient interest of someone who had already decided the throne was about to become vacant. And that legs, as it turned out, were never really the point. Grief has a smell, apparently, because within a week of Min-jae's confession, the vultures could smell something in the air and mistook it for weakness instead of what it actually was, a man finally telling the truth. The first vulture arrived on a Tuesday, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars, and a smile that had never once meant anything kind. His name was Yoon Tae-sik, and he had been humiliated by Min-jae 7 years earlier in a shipping deal that ended with Yoon publicly apologizing to a room full of men who never let him forget it. Grudges in this business didn't expire. They compounded, like interest. Min-jae. Yoon stood in the doorway of the study, uninvited, flanked by 2 men who looked like they moonlighted as furniture. "You're looking," he paused, letting the pause do the insulting for him, seated. "Tae-sik." Min-jae didn't look up from the tablet in his lap, where he was reviewing shipping manifests with the same precision he'd always had, wheelchair or not. "Still charging by the syllable for your insults? Inflation's rough this year. I heard you needed help standing." Yoon's smile widened. "I heard your wife does a lot of standing for you these days. Must be nice. A Nigerian queen carrying a Korean king who can't carry himself." The room went very still. Behind Yoon, one of the furniture men shifted, sensing, correctly, that he'd just watched his boss make a mistake. Min-jae set the tablet down, slowly. The kind of slow that used to precede violence, back when violence was still an option his body would cooperate with. "You came all this way," he said, voice level, "to make a joke about my wife?" "I came," Yoon said, "to see if the throne was really empty. Looks like it is. Half empty anyway." He glanced meaningfully at the wheelchair. "Get out of my house. Your house. For now." Yoon turned to leave, then paused at the door, delivering his real message with the practiced ease of a man who'd rehearsed it in the car. "Word is your organization's already fracturing. Word is your wife's tired. Word is—" "And I'm just repeating what I hear, Min-jae. Don't shoot the messenger. Ha, poor choice of words. Word is, she won't be around much longer. Woman like that, brilliant, beautiful, running her own empire? She didn't sign up to be a nurse." He left before Min-jae could respond, which was, of course, the entire point. Nia found her husband 40 minutes later, staring at nothing, jaw tight enough to crack walnuts. She didn't ask what happened. The security footage had already told her, and she'd watched all 4 minutes of it twice, hands curling into fists she didn't let him see. "He's wrong, you know," she said instead, settling into the chair across from him. "Which part?" "All of it, but mostly the part where he thinks insulting me will make you fall apart faster than losing your legs did." She said it lightly, but her eyes weren't light at all. "I've buried men like Yoon Tae-sik before. Businessmen. Men who thought a woman running numbers couldn't also run them out of the market. I didn't need a gun for that. I needed patience and receipts." Despite everything, Min-jae almost smiled. "Receipts. Everyone leaves a paper trail, my love. Even gangsters. Especially gangsters. You're all terrible at hiding money. It's honestly a little embarrassing." It should have ended there on that fragile, hard-won laugh. But that night, alone in her office with the door locked and her laptop glowing blue against her face, Nia pulled up something she hadn't told Min-jae she'd requested 3 weeks earlier. His full post-surgery medical file. Every page, every doctor's note, every timestamp from the hospital where he'd nearly died, and instead simply stopped being able to walk. She'd been looking for peace of mind. A confirmation that nothing more could have been done, so she could stop lying awake wondering. Instead, at 11:47 p.m., cross-referencing a medication log against a treatment timeline that didn't quite line up, Nia Okafor went very, very still. The same stillness her husband got right before violence, except hers came right before something far more dangerous. Certainty. Someone had changed his dosage in the first 72 hours. Someone with hospital access. Someone with a reason to make sure Kang Min-jae never stood up again. And she was going to find out exactly who. Nia didn't sleep that night. She sat with the medical file glowing on her screen until the numbers stopped looking like numbers and started looking like a confession written in a language only she seemed able to read. The dosage change was small. Elegant, almost, the kind of adjustment a careless observer would wave off as standard post-operative calibration. But Nia hadn't built a logistics empire spanning 2 continents by being a careless observer. She'd built it by knowing that the difference between a shipment arriving on time and a shipment disappearing into the Atlantic forever often came down to a single decimal point. Nobody bothered to double-check. Someone had bothered to check this one. Someone had changed it. By morning, she had a list. Not a long one. The hospital's private wing only allowed 6 people clearance to Min Jae's chart in those critical 72 hours. 2 surgeons, a nurse coordinator, and 3 members of Min Jae's own inner circle, men who'd sat at his table, eaten his food, sworn oaths that were supposed to mean something in a world where paper contracts meant nothing at all. She recognized one of the names immediately, and it made her hand go still over the keyboard. Park Ji-hoon, Min Jae's second-in-command, the man who'd stood beside him at their wedding, who'd held Min Jae's mother's hand at her funeral, who'd been in this house so many times he had his own mug in the kitchen cabinet. A ridiculous, sentimental mug shaped like a tiger, a joke gift from Min Jae himself for Ji-hoon's 40th birthday. Nia stared at that name until the letters blurred, then closed the laptop, because some fires you don't run toward with a bucket of water. You walk toward them slowly, quietly, making sure you understand exactly how big the blaze is before you decide whether to put it out or let it burn the person who started it. She said nothing to Min Jae, not yet. Telling him now, grieving, prideful, still relearning how to be a man in a chair, that his oldest friend might have stolen his legs on purpose, felt less like giving him information and more like handing him a loaded weapon with the safety off. She needed proof. She needed time. And she needed, above everything, to be absolutely certain, because if she was wrong, she would have detonated the one relationship in his life he trusted more than hers. So instead, over breakfast, she smiled at Min Jae like nothing in the world had cracked open at midnight and asked Park Ji-hoon to lunch. Ji-hoon arrived at the restaurant in Itaewon looking exactly like the man Nia had known for 4 years. Warm-eyed, quick to laugh, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and your children's birthdays, and apparently your access codes to a hospital chart. He kissed her cheek in greeting, the European habit he'd picked up somewhere and never dropped, and Nia led him, smiling the whole time, thinking, "You held my husband's mother's hand at her funeral. What did it cost you to hold a syringe instead?" "You look tired," Ji-hoon said, settling across from her, genuine concern etched into every line of his face. And that was the terrible thing about traitors in this story, the thing the audience needed to understand before the next twist landed. The good ones never look like traitors. They look like family. That's the whole trick. "Caregiving does that," Nia said lightly. "You'd know if you ever actually visited more than twice a month." "Ouch!" He pressed a hand to his chest, mock wounded. "I've been swamped, restructuring the northern port contracts. Somebody has to keep the ship steady while Min Jae recovers." He said recovers the way you'd describe weather. A passing condition, temporary, unremarkable. Is that what you'd call it? Recovers? Something flickered behind Ji-hoon's eyes, so fast Nia almost missed it. So fast she'd have missed it a year ago, before caregiving taught her to read a room for every micro-expression of exhaustion or deceit. "What else would I call it?" "I don't know," Nia said, stirring sugar into tea she had no intention of drinking. "You tell me, Ji-hoon. You were there, weren't you? Those first 3 days at the hospital?" The silence that followed lasted only 2 seconds. But 2 seconds, when you're watching for it, can tell you everything. "I was there for all of it," Ji-hoon said finally, voice perfectly even, perfectly practiced. "Every terrifying hour." Nia smiled and changed the subject to the weather, and Park Ji-hoon smiled back, and neither one of them touched their food again. Because somewhere in that exchange, both of them had understood something the other hadn't said out loud. The war for Kang Min-jae's empire had already started, and it wasn't going to be fought with guns. It was going to be fought with silence, and whoever broke first would lose everything. The threat arrived taped to the mansion gate on a Thursday morning, folded once, written in block letters that had clearly been disguised by someone trying too hard to disguise them. "Step down or step out." Beneath it, almost as an afterthought, someone had drawn a small, crude wheelchair. The gate guard who found it made the mistake of showing it to Min Jae directly instead of routing it through Nia first, and for one brief, ugly moment, the house remembered what its owner used to be capable of. Min Jae's hand shook, not from fear, from the sheer physical effort of not throwing the tablet across the room, and his voice, when it came, was quiet in the particular way that used to make grown men reach for their own exits. "Who else has seen this?" "Just me, sir, and now you. Burn it, and get me Jihoon." Naya found out anyway because Naya found out everything eventually, and when she walked into the study to find her husband staring at a scorch mark on the terrace where the note used to be, she didn't scold him for hiding it from her. She simply sat down across from him and said, "Tell me what it said." He told her. She listened without flinching, filing it away next to a name she still hadn't told him, and for one terrible moment, the two of them sat in a room full of secrets they were each keeping to protect the other, both convinced their silence was an act of love. "I want extra men on the gate," Min-jae said finally. "You have extra men on the gate. You've had extra men on the gate since the day you married me, and half of Seoul decided I was either a gold digger or a spy." Nia's voice was light, but her eyes were doing arithmetic. "This isn't about security, Min-jae. This is about someone wanting you to feel unsafe. There's a difference. A smart enemy doesn't threaten a man they intend to kill quietly. They threaten a man they want to watch fall apart publicly first. You sound like you have someone in mind," she almost told him then. The words were right there, sitting on her tongue like a stone. "Jihoon, I think it's Jihoon. I think your brother in every way that matters betrayed you for reasons I haven't figured out yet." But she looked at her husband's face, still raw from Yoon Tae-sik's visit, still relearning each morning how to hold his own dignity in two hands without dropping it, and made the same calculation she'd made at lunch. Not yet. Not without proof strong enough to survive the earthquake it would cause. "I have several someones in mind," she said instead. "That's rather the problem with running an empire built on fear, my love. Everyone has a motive. You've spent 15 years making enemies efficiently. Now we get to enjoy the return on that investment." That almost got a laugh out of him. Almost. The old rival struck again 2 days later, this time not at the gate, but at the Grand Hyatt, during a charity gala where half the city's legitimate business elite mingled with the half that only pretended to be. Yoon Tae-sik arrived late, loud, and directly in Min-jae's eyeline, raising a glass of champagne in a toast that everyone in the ballroom understood was aimed like a blade. "To Kang Min-jae," Yoon announced, voice carrying over the string quartet, "the boss who needs a push, literally, to get anywhere these days. May his wife's strength hold out a little longer, for his sake." The room's laughter was thin and nervous, the laughter of people who weren't sure if this was a joke they were allowed to enjoy. Min-jae, seated at the head table in his wheelchair, felt every eye in the room swing toward him, waiting to see if the throne really was as empty as Yoon insisted. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need to. Nia stood before he could, smoothing her dress with the unbothered elegance of a woman who had faced down worse than a drunk man with a grudge and a microphone-loud mouth. "Mr. Yoon," she said, voice pleasant enough to cut glass. "I believe in Nigeria we have a saying for men like you, the ones who mock a lion's injury from a safe distance because they know, deep down, they'd never survive being close enough to smell his breath." She lifted her own glass. "To Min-jae, who has survived assassins, betrayal, and now, apparently, open bar comedy hour. Some men run empires, others just run their mouths." The room's laughter turned, sharp and sudden, in Yoon's direction instead, and in the 2 seconds it took his face to go from smug to scarlet, Nia caught something over his shoulder that made her blood freeze mid-toast. Park Ji-hoon, standing near the exit, watching Yoon's humiliation with an expression that wasn't embarrassment on his boss's behalf. It was relief. Relief. That was the word Nia kept circling back to as the gala noise dimmed around her, as Yoon Tae-sik slunk back to his table, nursing a wound no amount of champagne would heal. Relief was not the expression of a loyal man watching his enemy get humiliated. Relief was the expression of a man who'd been hoping someone else would do his dirty work for him, hoping Yoon's public mockery might finally push Min-jae toward the kind of collapse that made empires easy to inherit. She didn't confront him that night. Instead, she went home, kicked off her heels in the foyer with more force than the heels deserved, and sat down at her laptop with the particular focus of a woman who had just run out of patience for being careful. If Ji-hoon had altered the hospital records, he hadn't done it alone. Men like him, charming, embedded, beloved, rarely got their own hands dirty. They found tools. And tools, unlike loyalty, could be bought, which meant tools left a trail Naya knew exactly how to follow, because tracking payments through shell companies was essentially the same skill set that had built her logistics empire in the first place. Money doesn't disappear, it just gets embarrassed and hides. By 2 a.m., she'd found it, a payment routed through 3 accounts and a fake consulting invoice from a shell company with Ji-hoon's cousin listed as a silent partner, paid directly to a nurse coordinator who'd since quietly left the hospital and relocated to Busan with a suspiciously generous severance. Nia sat back in her chair, hands trembling, not from fear this time, but from the specific, cold fury of confirmation. It wasn't circumstantial anymore. It wasn't a hunch dressed up as suspicion. Someone had paid to keep her husband in that chair, and the someone had a face she'd kissed hello 100 times, a name on the wedding guest list, a ridiculous tiger mug in their kitchen cabinet that Min-jae had bought as a joke because he loved this man like a brother. She almost woke Min-jae right there. She got as far as his door, hand on the frame, before she stopped. Not yet. If she told him now, in the middle of the night, raw with fresh proof, he would do what Kang Min-jae had always done with betrayal. Meet it head-on, immediately, violently, with a body that could no longer cash the check his instincts kept writing. She needed a plan that didn't require him to stand up and fight. She needed, God help her, to think like the boss instead of the wife for a few days, and pray the difference didn't cost either of them anything they couldn't survive losing. The opportunity to test her theory arrived faster than she expected. 2 days later, Ji-hoon came to the house himself. First visit in weeks, tiger mug and all, sitting at the kitchen island where he'd sat 100 times before, drinking coffee Nia made with hands that didn't shake, even though everything in her wanted them to. "You've been distant," he said to Min-jae warmly, convincingly, a performance so seamless Naya found herself almost admiring it the way you'd admire a forged signature. Beautiful work, wrong purpose. "I worry about you, Hung. The organization needs you present, visible, strong." "I'm sitting right here," Min-jae said, dry. "You know what I mean." "I know exactly what you mean," Min-jae said, and something in his tone made Nia's pulse quicken. Because for the first time in weeks, her husband sounded less like a wounded man and more like the kingpin who used to walk into rooms and dare people to test him. "You mean the organization needs someone who can stand at the front of a room? Someone who can lead by example? Isn't that the phrase you used at the board meeting last month? The one I wasn't invited to?" Ji-hoon's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. "You heard about that." "I hear about everything in my own house, Ji-hoon. Sitting down doesn't make me deaf." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Nia watched Ji-hoon recalibrate in real time, watched him choose his next words with the care of a man walking across thin ice he'd cracked himself, and she understood, with total clarity, that the moment of confrontation was no longer a question of if. It was a question of who would strike first, and whether the truth, once spoken aloud in this kitchen, would break the empire before it saved it. Ji-hoon set his coffee cup down with the exaggerated care of a man diffusing something. "Hyung, I don't know what you think you heard, but don't." Min-jae's voice was quiet, and quiet on him had always been worse than shouting. "Don't insult me by pretending I imagined a board meeting that happened in my own conference room, about my own empire, without me in it." Nia stood by the counter, coffee pot still in hand, and made a decision that would either save her marriage or detonate it in the next 30 seconds. She set the pot down. "Ji-hoon," she said, and something in her tone made both men turn. "Do you remember the tiger mug?" He blinked. "What?" "The mug. Min-jae bought it for your 40th birthday. It's still in our cabinet." She walked to the cabinet, opened it, and set the ridiculous, grinning ceramic tiger on the island between them like evidence at a trial, which, in a sense, it was. "He kept it because he said you were the only man in this business who never once made him feel like he had to watch his back. 15 years, Ji-hoon. He trusted you with his mother's life. He trusted you with mine." "Naya," Min-jae started, confused, sensing the ground shifting beneath a conversation he thought he understood. "I found the payment," Naya said, not looking away from Ji-hoon's face, watching every muscle in it fight to stay still. "Shell Company, your cousin's name on the paperwork, routed to a nurse coordinator who left the hospital 3 weeks after Min-jae's surgery with a severance package she didn't earn. She's in Busan now. I have her name. I have the transfer dates. I have the dosage change in the medical file that shouldn't exist, in a window only 6 people had access to." She let the silence stretch, cruel and necessary. You were one of the 6. The kitchen went so still Nia could hear the refrigerator hum. Min-jae's face had gone the color of old ash. Nia, what is she talking about? Nia didn't answer him. She kept her eyes on Ji-hoon, because everything now depended on the next 4 seconds of his face. And his face broke. Not into confession. Ji-hoon was smarter than that, smart enough to know a confession spoken aloud in this kitchen was a confession that could be repeated in front of worse men than Min-jae. But into something almost like grief, the particular grief of a man who has spent months rehearsing a justification and finally has to say it out loud. You don't understand what he was becoming, Ji-hoon said, voice low and for the first time real. You weren't there for the wars, Nia. You married the after. You didn't see what it cost to build this, how many men Min-jae buried to make sure we never had to bury each other. I loved him. I still love him. But an empire built on fear only survives as long as the fear is real. And everyone, Min-jae, Yoon, the northern syndicates, our own soldiers, everyone was starting to whisper that the fear had a wheelchair now. I didn't want you dead. I wanted you retired, safely, comfortably. Somewhere Nia could take care of you without a target on your back, and I could hold what you built together instead of watching vultures tear it apart piece by piece. You crippled me, Min-jae said, each word arriving like a slow, deliberate blow. To protect me? I crippled you, Ji-hoon said, and here finally his composure cracked all the way through. Because I couldn't watch you die the way I almost did. Because paralysis felt like mercy compared to a bullet that actually finished the job next time. Because I thought, God help me, I thought if you weren't a threat anymore, they'd let you live. The confession, once out, seemed to exhaust the room of oxygen. Min-jae stared at the man who'd held his mother's hand at her funeral, who'd stood beside him at his wedding, who'd just admitted to stealing his legs out of a broken, twisted, genuine love. And for the first time since the bullet, Nia watched her husband's hands curl into fists that had somewhere left to go, some purpose worth having again, even sitting down. Get out of my house, Min-jae said. Min-jae, get out. Ji-hoon left the tiger mug on the counter and walked out without another word. And the moment the door closed behind him, Nia understood 2 things with terrible clarity. First, that Ji-hoon hadn't told them the whole truth. No man confesses everything in one breath, especially not a man still protecting whoever he'd made the deal with. And second, that somewhere in the city, whoever had actually paid Ji-hoon to broker that shell company transfer was still out there, still watching, still assuming the throne would fall on schedule. Because a man like Ji-hoon didn't have the reach or the money to arrange a hospital sabotage entirely on his own. Someone above him had made this possible, and that someone was still coming. The someone above Ji-hoon revealed himself 3 nights later, and Nia had known, somewhere in the cold, calculating part of her mind that had learned to think like a boss instead of a wife, that it would be Yoon Tae-sik. It was almost too neat, the humiliated rival, the public mockery, the timing that made sense once you stopped assuming your enemies operated in isolation and started assuming they operated in networks. Yoon hadn't needed to fire a single shot. He'd simply found the one man close enough to Min-jae's heart to be recruited, and let guilt and love do the rest. The proof came from an unlikely source, Ji-hoon himself, 3 days after being thrown out of the house, arriving not with an apology, but with a flash drive, and the hollow-eyed look of a man who'd finally understood exactly what he'd been used for. Yoon financed it, he told them. Standing in the doorway, he no longer had the right to walk through uninvited. Not to kill him, to own him. A crippled kingpin who owes his second-in-command everything is a kingpin. Yoon could quietly control through me once I inherited the organization out of gratitude and guilt. I was never going to be his equal, Min-jae. I was going to be his puppet, and I was too stupid or too heartbroken to see it until he stopped returning my calls 2 weeks ago. He set the flash drive on the table. This is everything. Every transfer, every message, every order. Do what you want with it. Do what you want with me. Min-jae looked at the flash drive for a long moment, then at the man who had broken him and, in his own broken way, tried to save him at the same time. You'll testify, he said, formally, on record, and then you'll leave Seoul and never come back. That's the only mercy I have left in me, Ji-hoon. Use it or don't. Ji-hoon nodded once and left, and this time no one asked him to. The reckoning with Yoon Tae-sik happened not with guns or blood, but in a boardroom full of Seoul's underworld elite, where Nia Okafor stood beside her husband's wheelchair and laid out, with the same precision she'd once used to save failing shipping contracts, the entire architecture of Yoon's betrayal. The shell company, the payments, Ji-hoon's recorded testimony. The nurse coordinator's signed statement from Busan. She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't need to. By the time she finished, the men in that room who had spent months whispering that Min-jae was finished were staring at Yoon Tae-sik, the way you stare at a man who has just been publicly, permanently ruined. Not by a bullet, but by receipts. You wanted to know if the throne was empty, Nia said, closing her laptop with a quiet click that landed like a gavel. It isn't. It was just waiting for you to prove exactly how small you really are. Yoon didn't survive that boardroom the way he'd walked into it. Within a month, his own allies had abandoned him. His own soldiers had defected to men still loyal to Min-jae, and the underworld that once feared Kang Min-jae's grip learned, all over again, that the throne had never needed his legs at all. That night, back home, the rain had finally stopped, Seoul's skyline clear and glittering through the window for the first time in what felt like a season. Min-jae sat by the glass, and Nia knelt beside his chair the way she had 100 times before, except this time neither of them felt the weight of what he couldn't do. They felt, instead, the weight of everything they'd survived to still be sitting there together. "I'm still a man, Nia," he said again, softer this time, no longer a plea. "I know," she said, and this time she said it out loud, the words she hadn't given him the first time, because now he didn't need to hear them to believe they were true. "You were always still a man. You just needed someone to remind you what the word actually means. Not legs, not fear, not an empire built on other men's nightmares. Just this, a woman who never once measured him by his ability to stand, and a man who finally understood that the strongest thing he'd ever done wasn't surviving a bullet. It was letting her carry him until he could carry himself again."